Hi everyone, it's Jakey again. We're back with a new video, this time diving deep into the Nuke Wall. Now, those who've been following this channel will know this was supposed to be a video looking at magic damage in general. However, when I got to looking at how the Nuke Wall worked, I found out it worked completely differently than how I thought it did. So we had to just sit down and figure out how it worked, and I'm making a video here to talk about what I learned. Not what was expected, but I think you will find this potentially very informative. I certainly did. So here we have our table of content. First, going to just say what is the Nuke Wall. The journey I had to go on to figure this out. Starting to math it out. Scaling. What about time? What about more nukers? Other types of magic, and then finally conclusions. So what is the Nuke Wall? Well, it reduces elemental magic damage when casted within 5 seconds of another nuke of the same element against a notorious monster. Now, I'm bolding here same element and notorious monster because otherwise it doesn't work. So that's very important. And this is especially bad for black mages, especially because magic burst windows are where we do vast majority of our damage, and the nuke wall counters us trying to do all our damage during those windows because it's nerfing our damage when we put it close together. And historically, it was added primarily due to Black Mage alliances nuking down the Archangel fight in seconds back in the day. They also added an AOE nerf for Black Mages at the same time. So, and let's head over to BG and see what it says about the nuke wall. So here we are on BG Wiki, and here's what it says about the nuke wall. So, consecutive elemental damage penalty, also known as the nuke wall. There's a penalty applied to any elemental damage dealt to a monster for 5 seconds after the first damage is dealt. I would specify it has to be the same element. This is a common issue during magic bursts and guaranteed to happen with multiple casters. I mean, assuming they're all trying to magic burst, yeah. But I mean, you could just have two different nukers each do one magic burst 5 seconds apart from each other, and it wouldn't happen. So, I mean, for the most part, true, but little misleading. Uh, Second nuke within 5 seconds deals 30% less damage. Uh, so this can happen, but it is by far not the most likely outcome of doing two nukes. It turns out. While further nukes within 5 seconds deal minus 60% damage. This actually can't happen. I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah, that no. Reiki with a corresponding elemental rune will reduce the penalty to 30% for all nukes. I mean, no. So the weird thing when I was doing testing, Reiki actually didn't affect the, at least not the 5 second nuke wall. I do suspect there are certain NMs that appear to build up a resistance over time besides just this 5 second uh, kind of window penalty. Uh, and Reiki does seem to help with those monsters a lot. But for just the 5 second nuke wall penalty, it didn't do a single thing in my testing. Uh, Only applies to notorious monsters, correct. Elemental damage for skill chains is excluded from this. That is true, although that is not what I would consider an exhaustive list of what may or may not be included in the nuke wall. So I will go through the list I put together a little bit later. But so this is what I was working with, and the problems here were that one, just doing a second nuke after a first nuke, the damage reduction actually was a wide range from 0 to 40%. Uh, I didn't even get to testing further nukes until much later, so I didn't know about the issues with that until later as well, because I only had two accounts, and so just that even that initial amount, it wasn't just one number. It was a wide range of numbers. And then additionally, over those 5 seconds, the number would change. So I didn't even have a good framework to figure out how it actually worked was. So I had to like go from the ground up trying to figure out how this worked. So yeah, it was a bit of a journey here. Quickly became clear that the BG page on Nuke Wall was just not up to what I needed. And so I just had to start doing tests. At first, I theorized that it was perhaps dependent on the tiers of the nukes, but the amounts still didn't line up. I was getting lots of weird numbers that just didn't make any sense. Eventually, I ended up actually leveling a whole new mule so that I could have two nukers with identical stats. So then I could vary things and have control and know exactly, what is different between the two nukers. And I pretty quickly realized once I had that up and running that it had to be dependent on the damage of the nuke. And that's where I get to the graph coming up here. So I eventually decided to plot the damage of the initial nuke in the x-axis, and then the reduction in the damage of the second nuke caused by that first nuke on the y-axis as a percentage. So, I mean, this is a very clear graph. We know we've got a nice linear relationship here, and then we've hit a cap here. This is what you like to see. There's a slight bit of wobbliness to this just because you're reverse engineering from a value that's gotten truncated at multiple steps, because that's how magic damage works. After each step it gets truncated, and then if you try to reverse engineer the Nuke Wall, it's going to be not perfectly lining up because of the truncation that happens. But I mean, this is a really clear linear relationship here. So it ends up capping at about a 2,540 damage. At which point it stays at a 40% damage reduction for nukes. Now, of course, those of you who play these days will know that's not a lot of damage. Basically, all modern nukes, once you're in your full nuking set, are going to be doing well over that in terms of damage against almost anything you fight. So certainly anything that you would want to nuke against. So you're basically just always at the 40% cap. And then there's this relationship here that doesn't seem very relevant. So first thought I had, well, does this scale at all? So I had been doing my testing at this point on the Abyss Diver Unity NM level 119. And my first thought was maybe it scales based on the max amount of HP. It was about 3% of its max HP to do 2,540 damage. Maybe it just scales with HP. But after additional testing against other NMs, I eventually realized no, it's not really scaling with HP. As I continued to try other higher level NMs, it stayed at the same 2,540 damage to reach the 40% Nuke Wall penalty. I did then try some lower level NMs. And when I tried the level 75 Unity NMs, I did see a lower damage needed to hit the 40% mark. I tried some Abyssia NMs, those were also lower damage. And then I went to the level 99 Unity NMs and was back to 2,540. And my conclusion at the end here, I didn't work out the full formula for its scaling, but it appears that the scaling stopped at level 99. Now, it wasn't scaling enough that it would have even mattered for us today very much anyways. Like, what? It would have scaled up to like 3,000, maybe 4,000 damage for the NMs we're fighting now. Like, would that even be relevant to us? Not really. But it's still like, really, you just stopped the scaling at level 99, so now we're just like stuck always hitting the 40% nuke wall penalty for basically any nuke. And then that also doesn't question, why am I even caring about this, like scaling at the really low damage? Like, what's a case for that at all? Well, I do end up finding one later on here. I'm getting ahead of myself. There is a use case for it, but at first glance, it doesn't seem like there should be one. Okay, so what about time? Now, I had said that it seemed to reduce over those 5 seconds, but I need to actually figure out how does it reduce. Turns out it stays constant for about 1 second after a nuke, and then the penalty gets reduced by 20%. And by reduced by 20%, I mean if it's at 40%, it goes to 20. If it's at 30, it goes to 10. And if it's at 20, it goes to 0. So if you're at a 20% nuke wall penalty after doing a nuke, and you wait 1 second, the nuke wall penalty will go away. So that's kind of cool. But again, because it didn't scale, I mean, that doesn't seem like a very important scenario. Although again, I'm telling you, there actually is a use case for that. Stick around. Now, and I should also note, it stays at whatever it is after that 20% reduction for the next 4 seconds before the nuke wall goes away entirely after the 5th second. So that's kind of how that works. And so next, what we gotta look at is, well, what if there's another nuke that happens? So Nugo2Go very kindly allowed me to borrow an account so I could have 3 nukers. And first thing I found, the nuke wall does not reduce damage by more than 40%. So I could have 3 nukers basically casting simultaneously. First nuke does full damage. The next 2 both just get reduced by 40%. But they had said on BG that they add up. So I go, okay, well, let's check if I'm below 40%. So these are actual rounded numbers from an actual test I did. I had the first nuke do enough damage to give a 19.4% nuke wall penalty. The second nuke did 19.4% less damage than its base damage would have suggested. And after that reduction, it did enough damage that I would expect it to give me a 13.5% nuke wall. But then the third nuke was actually reduced by 32.9%, which is 19.4 plus 13.5. So it does add the nuke penalties together. And then I did the whole test again, but on the third nuke, I waited over an extra second after the second nuke. And sure enough, it got reduced by the 20%. So instead of 32.9%, it was 12.9%. So yeah, yes, it does add, but it only adds up to the 40%. The much more common scenario we're going to be dealing with all the time is first nuke does way more than enough damage to apply a 40% nuke wall penalty. And then after 1 second, that'll degrade to a 20% nuke wall penalty. Any additional nukes after that will just, depending on whether you cast them during the 40% penalty time, in which case they get reduced by 40%, or during the 20% penalty time and they get reduced by 20%, they will then, they'll add their new 40%, which gets capped at 40%, and it'll just start the same 1 second of 40% penalty and 4 seconds of 20% penalty. It'll just keep resetting the timer every time someone does a nuke. And so what this would suggest is, if you have multiple nukers, what you want to do is just have them all try to stay just over a second apart from each other, so they're all just getting the 20% penalty instead of the 40% penalty. Also, I should note, I do think there's a little bit more going on here in some scenarios. Certain NMs appear to build resistance up over time. That doesn't just go away after 5 seconds. And that's something different. Now, that's not something I'm looking at here. And I don't know whether spreading out nukes more than this might help alleviate that at all or not. But just purely from the nuke wall, it looks like, yeah, just try to stay a second apart from each other if you're using more than one nuker. Because other than that, I mean, you don't want to wait a full 5 seconds between each person nuking. And a 20% penalty is not that bad. Okay, so I know this is going to cause some controversy as well. I actually sat down and I tested each of these scenarios. Imminence nukes. I had long assumed these weren't affected by the nuke wall and certainly didn't add to the nuke wall. Turns out, no, they do. And they do so at the exact same expected rate as any normal nuke would. So this means scholars. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing tier 2 skill chains on Scholar, you're actually using different elements to make the skill chain than what you're bursting with. So while you may be adding to the nuke wall, it'll be in elements that don't matter, so it's irrelevant. But in tier 1 skill chains, you are using the element that you'll be bursting with. And that's where I'm going to be looking at nerfing my Imminence nuking set to try to at least get the damage below 1270, which is the 20% nuke wall penalty. So that I know it goes away after only a second. And so if someone does magic burst right on that for a second, it's only a 20% penalty for them. Either way, it's clearly not that big of a deal because it just caps at 40% after the first nuke anyways. But that is something that's actually going to change how I gear something, so I think that's important. And that is a use case for why it matters that that the nuke wall actually does go down at really low damage. Okay, ninjutsu. Yeah, it was affected by the nuke wall and it adds to it. Blue magic, again, affected by the nuke wall and it adds to it. Now, I know a lot of people for a long time said blue magic doesn't. Now, what blue magic doesn't get affected by is the AoE nerf. And I double checked that. It for sure is not affected by the AoE nerf. But it is affected by the nuke wall. Now, it's less relevant for blue mage because they're not as good at doing the whole magic bursting thing. They have that tied behind abilities and stuff. So it's somewhat less relevant for them that they're part of the nuke wall, but they in fact are. Lunge and swipe. So swipe was both adds to the nuke wall and is affected by the nuke wall at the expected amounts. Lunge added to it in the expected amount. However, its damage was, while it was reduced by the nuke wall, it wasn't reduced in the expected amount. And it really, at this point, was like, oh no, I'm sorry, I did not sit down and test out exactly why Lunge's damage was reduced less by the nuke wall than expected, but it was still reduced by it. So I just put an asterisk on it, and we're moving on. If some like Rune Fencer main wants to sit down and work that out, welcome to do so. Divine magic and healing magic against undead were both affected by the nuke wall and both add to the nuke wall. However, of course, it's element specific, so it's only really relevant if other people are also using light magic for nuking. So that's a bit niche. And then I confirmed that elemental shots on core, elemental weapon skills, and skill chains all are not affected by and do not add to the nuke wall. I left normal elemental magic off the list because that's just kind of assumed that's what this was all based off of. So yes, of course, it's also affected by the nuke wall and adds to it. But yeah, definitely a few surprises here. Did not expect lunge and swipe to make the list. Blue magic, I really wasn't sure. I really didn't know what to think on healing magic against undead, but okay, sure, it's added in there. But the imminence nukes being in there, that really surprised me. That's actually going to change how I gear Scholar. So, conclusions. The nuke wall is described here. It's just far less impactful than I believed. Pretty much any modern nuke will apply the max 40% nuke wall for 1 second, and then 4 seconds of a 20% nuke wall. And additional nukers don't really do much other than just resetting those timers and, being punished according to whether they're in the 40% or 20% range. Uh, it's really not that bad. That imminence nukes do count means, we're actually going to have to look at changing some of our gear on Scholar to try and take advantage of what I learned about in terms of having low damage to avoid the nuke wall. Because that's entirely possible, because most people are already using tier 1 nukes for imminence. You just nerf your damage gear down. Now, do be careful. Don't go naked. I don't want anyone just getting randomly one shot by a breeze when they're trying to do their skill chain. Like, find some gear that doesn't have any MAB on it and doesn't have too much int on it, but still can keep you alive. I'm going to be playing around with my Volti Treasure Hunter set, because, hey, Treasure Hunter is a neat thing to throw in there. But we can think about different sets to accomplish our goals there. And then another thing which I just haven't talked about, but is fairly well known about the nuke wall. The damage cap is applied after the nuke wall, so if you have enough damage, you can cap regardless of nuke wall. So if you would normally do 166,665 damage, you don't even have to care about the nuke wall. Even with a 40% reduction, you'll be doing capped. Or if you wait 1 second, you only need 124,999 normally to cap. And these are doable numbers for Scholar and Black Mage. Now, I do think there are certain fights that appear to build up a resistance over time beyond just the 5-second nuke wall. Unfortunately, most of the NMs I can think of that I believe have that sort of thing are not very friendly or cheap or easy for me to just endlessly test against. So I'm going to have to think more about how to figure out what's going on with those NMs. But just the basic nuke wall here is really not that bad. I learned a ton. I mean, this took a ridiculous amount of testing to sort through all of this. I hope you all learned something. I don't know when or if I'll get around to actually doing a full magic damage video after doing all of this. But hey, if that's really something you want, let me know, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video. It really helps the channel out.